It's another beautiful Sunday afternoon. This is Robbie Mines. Welcome. My name is Ebuka Obiuchendu. Thanks a lot for joining us. It's about 16 days or thereabouts since the federal government temporarily suspended the activities of Twitter here in Nigeria. Temporary starting to look almost permanent, going on 3 weeks now. Hopefully we get to a resolution. I think a lot of people are just worried about what this might lead to with regards to not necessarily just freedom of speech for citizens, but even the media as a whole. So we're hoping all of this gets fixed sooner rather than later. Also, we did see reports about Mr. President traveling to an ECOWAS summit. There's a lot of talk about the need for West Africa to be stronger, especially with regards to what's happening in the security space. There's a lot of collaboration that needs to happen, so we hope that some good things came out of that. But we're going to be starting off the conversation today with a look at education, a sector that's very, very dear to a lot of Nigerians. And a lot of people seem to rightfully not be happy with what's happening in that sector. It wasn't necessarily in one of the cardinal points of this administration when they came into power, but they've also made some promises. And we're going to be just taking a look at what's happening in that space and hopefully look forward to what we can be doing differently. And I have here with me Bironke Olurotimi and Okeinfo Ajayi. Thanks a lot for being here today. So I did see something about a report that was released recently talking about the fact that we have over 10 million out-of-school children, which is the most in the world, and about 27 million children who are even in school are performing very poorly. So on the one hand, we have an issue of people not even going to school, and then on the other hand, it looks like those who are in school are not even doing well. And when you speak with people who are recruiting in Nigeria for work, you almost get the same feedback about how sort of poorly trained Nigerian graduates are as a whole. Why are we here now? How did we get here?
Okay, so I would start by saying that research has shown us that the teacher is at the center, and the teacher is like the most important variable for learning in the school system. And if we're still having issues of teacher capacity and teacher quality in 2021, it leaves a lot to be desired, really. And like I always tell my colleagues and people who are close to me, that we need to get to the point where our teacher training curriculum is revamped, because that is where it starts from. So we need to, we look at countries where they have very good performing education systems, and we look at the very beautiful things that they do. But there are things that they are doing that we can learn from. Say, for instance, I wouldn't want to mention any country actually, but there are countries where you have the best in the classroom. Do we have the same in Nigeria? And this still speaks to the issue of teacher quality and teacher capacity. So it goes back to the teacher training colleges, revamping of the teacher training curriculum, and also ensuring that the government intentionally poaches the best candidates to work within the school system and in the education system.
It looks like politics always gets mixed up in this teacher issue, because we've seen a few state governors who have tried to say, okay, teachers should write exams, and some of them, like we had, failed even primary school questions and all of that. So is it a case of the willpower not being there? And how do we start this reform you're talking about of teacher training here? Okay,
so I think the political will is one thing. I think another thing is also knowing exactly where to start from, or what exactly should be done. So if we say we're revamping the national curriculum, we know that it will start from the teacher training colleges. Those who write the curriculum might not even know where to start from. So they also their capacity needs to be developed in that area, and also ensuring that when candidates go into these teacher training colleges, there's a particular benchmark. Like if you don't meet this particular cutoff, you can't get into a teacher training college. A teacher training college shouldn't be a place where people who have been rejected in universities or polytechnics or couldn't get into the course of their choice end up, because that's really the case now. Yeah. And so when we get to the point where we carry out teacher assessments and we're saying our teachers are not passing grade 2 examinations, of course, we know that the fundamental issue is there. And if we don't fix it from that point, we will still continue to have those outcomes.
I like the fact that you mentioned curriculum there. And I saw a report by the Lagos Business School talking about the academic curriculum here in Nigeria, saying from nursery, primary, secondary, and even tertiary institutions, our curriculum is older than the country itself. Yeah. And anybody who went to university in Nigeria knows these things, even as recently as today. You go into the library and you're seeing books from the 70s and 60s, things hardly updated. Why?
first thing, right, Ebuka, is we have a huge problem with feedback in the country, right? So when you think about where the end point of education, right, I'm not learning for learning's sake. I'm learning to an end. What is the end? How many people truly understand the end? When you understand the end, even with an old textbook, I can use it. But when it's almost like there's no clear sight as to what exactly people are in school for. There's obviously a huge problem between what is going on in there and what is going on the outside. So that disconnect, unfortunately, is dry. It keeps going. And the more the disconnect lingers, the wider the gap between the realities and how to bridge that gap, unfortunately, is going to be there. So to speak directly to your question, we have zero feedback. We have zero leadership. We have zero accountability structures. We have zero maintenance culture. So, you know what? When you look at all of those things, it unfortunately boils down to people who honestly don't know what they're doing. Yeah. Both those that are teaching and those that are being taught. Because there's no functionality. I mean, if I ask you right now that how much of what you studied in school are you using today in the workplace, you probably would say maybe 20 to 30% of it, maybe more, depending on if you had a specialization course. But what have you been able to do with what you learned and where you are today is adaptive learning. Unfortunately, in our schools, with us as a people, we don't have thinkers. So a country that is not thinking, a sector that is not thinking, mostly, honestly, because of what my colleague said, it's almost like, what's the point? There's this tussle between the political will and the no political will, and education not being important and deprioritizing it, such that the people even in the sector are feeling, am I that important? It's almost like you're one step ahead of the nanny. And to be honest, that is not what it is, because education is nation building. Mm-hmm. And if there's a problem with that, there's a problem with the nation. And that's what we see.
You say that, and I wonder, because private schools have always been around. You know, when we were growing up back in the day, I say that like I'm very old, but I mean, they existed, but also government schools also existed, and the gap wasn't that crazy. Mm-hmm. It was okay for parents to send their schools anywhere. Mm-hmm. Now, you see private schools, the proliferation is unbelievable, even universities now. And for the better part, a lot of these private schools seem to know what they're doing. What are they doing right that government cannot seem to get right, is what I want to know.
What you want to know? One thing that they're doing right is that in a private school, a parent has paid XYZ school amount of money to make sure that my child goes from here to here. So there are clear learning expectations, there are clear learning outcomes that's communicated to the parent. Right from the beginning, when you register your child in a school, when I register my child in a school, clearly, what's your curriculum is the question. So what will my child be able to do in this classroom is the question. And it's clearly stated, and it's almost like it's rubber stamped. It doesn't happen in the public school. Not like it should. So guess what? There's no accountability. Again, there's no direct feedback between the consumers of education and those that are producing or servicing the consumers. And so if that correlation doesn't exist, you're not going to see what it should be. And so that's the problem. That's why government is unable to replicate it. Because even in the public sector, who exactly monitors education in Nigeria? The Ministry of Education? What framework are they using to monitor education in Nigeria? I'm not shooting myself in the foot. I'm right in the sector. I really think about it. How often do they go? When they go, what are they checking? So what exactly are the metrics that are being checked? I'm very passionate about this. And are those metrics that are being checked communicated? So do the schools, for example, public and private, it should be exactly the same yardstick, because it's the same children that are going out into the same country, the same economy. And so if I'm doing well in a private school, then I have a problem with the public school counterparts, right? Because there's an unequal yardstick right there. Yeah. So it should be the same exact clear metrics that are being used, and it must be communicated clearly. When I know what the expectations are, and I know that I'm going to be called to answer to those expectations, I better do my job. But unfortunately, I don't know.
I mean, we've talked a lot about willpower, which is, of course, is a very important thing. But we can also talk about education without money, which is why some of the best schools in the world are very expensive, because education is not cheap, and quality education especially. Talking about government now, the sort of priority they place on education, almost year in, year out, we've seen how much, whatever percentage they allocate to education, is almost as if it's one of those things, okay, let's just pay lip service to this is your allocation, go away. Which is why we see these perennial strikes happening with ASU all the time, because money is not paid. You know, is money a big factor here, I guess, is my question. And what sort of role can money play if government pays more attention sort of on a budgetary level to education? Okay,
so money is something that we cannot overemphasize in education. If you look at the countries where we refer to as having the best performing systems or the really great performing systems that we want to be like, they don't pay lip service to education. They make sure that they fund education. The UNESCO recommends about 26%, but we know that we've not even gotten close to 10%, and that is a source of worry. And you know, with the very limited resources that we have, a large chunk of it still goes to paying salaries. So there's not enough funds to do infrastructure, to carry out capital projects, to be able to carry out interventions that will impact directly on learning. So if the government's posturing is that, well, education is just one of those things, we will continue to be here. And that is why the private sector are taking it upon themselves, because looking at the posturing of the government is not doing so much in education as we would want them to do. So that's why we have a lot of private schools, private universities springing up every day, because education is not something that we don't trivialize it. Like, it's the future. And if we're saying that we want to achieve the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, if you look at it critically, you find out that education will drive a number of it. So if we pay attention to education, we'll be able to reach our goals very quickly. Yeah. So funding is very, very key.
I want to talk about tertiary institutions there, because I mentioned ASU. And, you know, there are people who say, whatever you want to do with ASU, or whatever you want to do with federal universities, or even university education in Nigeria as a whole, it might be a bit too late by the time you get there, because nursery, primary, secondary are even more fundamental. Is it possible to, because ASU seems to be the loudest, all of the other sectors don't have like a united voice like we hear. So ASU makes a strong case every time, you know, when they have an issue. So if by God's grace or whatever it is, university issues gets fixed, is that enough?
It's not enough. As a direct answer to your question, it's definitely not enough, because like you just mentioned, right, the early years are critical. And if you don't pay enough attention to the early years, it's like the foundation. And once the foundation and the character has been formed, and I'm not talking about the character of the child now, even though that's part of it, but even the character of the learner, right? You have different characteristics and different characters that learners show out there. Exhibit is the word I'm looking for. And so if you have a problem in the primary and secondary education, it already has spilled over into tertiary education. So yeah, it's not enough. So we really do need to look a little deeper into what's going on in our nursery and in our primary schools and secondary schools, just so that we ensure that we can catch it. And what are we looking at? We should be looking at the problems we have in the university education and saying to ourselves, where is this coming from? Obviously, it didn't start when it got into the university, right? It started before. And so before means what? Secondary school. And if you go back a little bit backwards, you're going to primary school and then maybe preschool. And then, of course, look at the parents. You can't take them out of this, right? So we need to begin to look at, and that's the same thing I say to everybody. If there's a don't solve the problem. Find the root cause. If you find the root cause and solve it from there, it's largely it might not reoccur, but if you don't find the root cause, it will reoccur. And so again, to speak directly to your question, we need to look into our secondary schools, our primary schools, and say to ourselves, what exactly are we missing? What is the need gap here? What are the skill sets that are not being checked, that are not being given to the students? For example, research skills. For example, ability to work by themselves. Independence is not being given, right? Even accountability. You have parents who are telling you to give your child a mark for effort when they scored 0. Excuse me, why should anybody even think about that? And so think about what will happen in the university. That child already has an entitled mindset. Mom and dad will buy it for me.
So that's a big problem. Question to both of you. Let me start with you. A bit controversial sometimes. Are government-funded tertiary institutions still viable in Nigeria?
I would say no. And why do I say no? By the time the money gets to secondary university, I don't think it really exists anymore. And again, there's no structures to say this is the money that was given, this is what it was used for, so
exactly.
So
but it's also a political thing, because government funding goes out, school fees gets increased, fewer people get access to education.
So I think that it's actually a problem of accountability and transparency here. So if money is going out into a particular or for a particular cause, who goes back to check how the money is being spent? The people that are spending the money, do they come to account or to make accounts? And the people who are beneficiaries or who are benefiting from the funds that is being injected into the particular system, do they have the right capacity to be able to demand accountability from the people who are serving them. So I think those are like, critical issues around tertiary institutions that you're talking about. Because if I look at my own school, and I use it as an example, I graduated there in 2006, and I went there last year for some reason, and I was able to speak with some students in the department where I graduated, and it's not the same. Like, the lecturers are tired, the system is just not, looks like it's not working. And even those who are lecturers in the school, some of them have their children in private schools, and you ask yourself that you are a lecturer.
Which never used to happen, actually.
It never used to happen. It never used to happen. Some of them even, teach in these private institutions, because they know that the private sector won't owe them their salaries, and whatever it is that is in their offer letter is what they will get. And that's why we're still having issues of ASU strike now, because salaries are being owed. We don't know how many months. Some of the entitlements have been withheld by the government, and the government is saying, we don't even have enough money to pay or to be able to meet up with these demands. So at the end of the day, at the root is accountability and transparency. And the truth is, it's not all gloom. Like, the government is not just useless, like everybody seem to say. Because the truth is, if the capacity of government is improved to be able to provide accountability, it will happen. And I'll give you an example. So there's a program in Ogun State that the organization where I work is supporting. It's a national school feeding program. And this program, very fantastic, The whole idea is for it to help improve learning outcomes and to also improve school enrollment. And that also speaks to the question of these out-of-school children, because this program is actually meant to help reduce that number. Of course, a research or a survey is going to show if we still have up to 10.5 million out-of-school children. Of course, COVID is going to also contribute to that number. But what I'm trying to say is that over the last 3 years that we've been, supporting the state government on that project, what we found is that when we stepped in and supported the government in improving their capacity to provide accountability, things are improved. The citizens now know that this particular program is for us, it's meant to benefit us. So if we're not getting the benefit, we will speak out, and the government will tell us what is happening. And I feel like it's a two-way street. The citizens should be able to demand accountability, and the government should be able to provide it. But the ability to provide it is one thing. And the ability for the citizen also to demand this accountability is another thing. And that's what we've seen in this project that I talked about over the last 3 years. And it's working. So the government can actually have their capacities improved on accountability and transparency.
You want to say something?
Yeah, as you're speaking, what just hit me again is the fact that it's almost like you don't really know what you should be looking out for. And once you don't know what you should be looking out for, then you might be looking at the wrong thing, or the thing that is speaking the loudest, which, like you just mentioned, is the ASU. They're speaking the loudest, they have the loudest voice, but are they the most important voice, really? And so if we don't really have the structures in place, and structure is such a big word, people just use it, everywhere, structure. But let's break it down into the nitty-gritty of it, right? And that means stakeholder engagement. And we need to have functional stakeholder engagement, not handpicked, cherry-picked, but actually going down and say, you know what? And technology drives that, doesn't it? All we need to do is say to ourselves, who exactly are the stakeholders? Where are they? And that's what data does. We don't have enough data in this country. We're not actively looking for the data. We're not collecting the data. Even where it exists, it's not being used functionally. And to be honest, Ebuka, if that doesn't change, we're just going to keep having, I don't know if I should say that on air, but we're going to keep having people just, living, because they're better used somewhere else. And, that's the reality of it.
On a final note, very quickly, because I think we have just about a minute to go. Quick answer from both of you. Because I'm not very optimistic, I'm not going to lie. Because a lot of these battles seem very long-term. What do you see in the coming years for education in Nigeria, very quickly?
I would say that I'm an optimist. So if I say this, you might think, she doesn't know what she's saying. But I think that there is hope, especially because in the last 12 to 15 months since coronavirus became a pandemic, we find that technology has been the big word, right? And we've seen a lot of education interventions being driven with technology. And I know that if we continue on that path, there is hope, right? There is hope for us. But at the end of the day, what we also need to focus on is that education and the learner must be at the center of whatever technology is going to be doing for us. It shouldn't be the other way around, because that's the mistake that, technology experts and private sector companies or tech companies, continue to make. They create a technology and they just want it to be driven, right?
Unfortunately, we have to go. But thank you very much to both of you for being here today. for giving us great insights, and hopefully when next you're here, we'll talk about better things. We'll take a break now and be right back. Please don't go away.